Hello and welcome to Dialogue. It has been 1 year since the war broke out in Gaza, and the region is bordering on an all-out war between Israel and the so-called Axis of Resistance led by Iran. How significant is the war in its long-term impact on regional security and the political landscape? How much worse will things become before it gets any better? If there's a peaceful solution, how does it look like? And if there's one? Join us for discussion today from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are John Ghazvinian, the Executive Director of the Middle East Center of the University of Pennsylvania. And then we have Dr. Sara Yael Hirschhorn, a visiting professor at the University of Haifa, and Ghanbar Naderi, journalist and political commentator. Welcome to Dialogue. So Sara, we'll start with you. Okay, 1 year is gone. You know, we have seen all the conflicts, and which is still raging. So how do you assess this long-term significance of course, October 7th event and the ensuing war after that?
Well, it's certainly been a world historical year. I think the Chinese are famous for saying that we are cursed to live in interesting times, and we have been living in very interesting times here in the region. I've been based in Jerusalem since last fall, and I can tell you it's been a very tense and intense period. October 7th, certainly the anniversary yesterday, was a moment of profound grief and reflection, both about where we've been, but where we're going. We can recall that only last night, several rockets were shot off from the Gaza Strip, which causes, I think, most of the Israeli public to ask the question, what has this whole year brought us? That Hamas still apparently has some capabilities to act from the Gaza Strip. We are now also at war in the north. My university itself is closed because of the ongoing military operations in northern Israel and in Lebanon, and a general sense that there is going to be a retaliation for last week's attack from Iran, where I spent an hour in the bomb shelter here in Jerusalem as 180-odd ballistic missiles were aimed at Israel. And we are all holding our breaths to wait to see what kind of strike may take place in the coming days or even today. In response. So we've very much entered a new chapter of history here, and I think we are all waiting with bated breath to see when these now multi-front war will resolve itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ghanbar, how do you look at the past year?
Well, it's been devastating for America, for Israel, for the so-called resistance front, and of course for Iran. Not to mention the international community. We know that now the golden age of Israel is over. There is no longer collective guilt about the Holocaust during the Second World War. At the same time, the myth of invincibility of Israel is gone. It's so easy now for some countries to attack Israel with great impunity and, of course, accuracy. At the same time, as I told you, the golden age of America is also gone over the past 1 year. America no longer holds influence economically, diplomatically, or militarily since what it had after the Second World War. The golden age of America in the 1990s, after the collapse of the former Soviet Union, is also gone because of the failed war on terror that America waged in the Middle East and beyond. But at the same time, I can tell you with confidence that this is a game of losers. Everybody has lost. The resistance front has lost. Israel has lost. America has lost. And of course, the international community is also going to lose big time if this violence spreads and includes Iran.
Well, everybody loses. So I think most of people would agree with you, but except for probably Prime Minister Netanyahu. John, the Prime Minister said recently, with the elimination of Hezbollah leader Nasrallah, that quote here, the balance of power in the region for years to come, has been changed by Israel in its favor. Is that the case?
It remains to be seen, but I think it's extremely unlikely. I know this is part of Netanyahu's rhetoric, which is that he sees this as an opportunity to deal a kind of devastating blow to Iran and its proxies in the region, and to fundamentally reshape the narrative of the region. Anyone who knows anything about the Middle East knows that that's extremely unlikely, that the forces that have given rise over not just years but decades to the creation of Hezbollah, Hamas, a lot of these militias, as well as, of course, the Iranian Revolution, are long-term trends. They're not things that just disappear. You don't blow up a few pages and assassinate a leader and then expect that somehow Iran's influence in the region is simply going to disappear, that the Islamic Republic is going to crawl under a rock. To do that, Netanyahu, to really do that, would have to somehow be able to foment an actual revolution in Iran and bring about a pro-Western, pro-Israeli kind of political arrangement. And I think even he would admit that's probably beyond his capability. So, we're likely to continue seeing, frankly, more hostility and more conflict rather than this fundamental reshaping of the map that I think he's claiming. But of course, he has to claim that, because without that, it's not really clear what the objective is. As your previous guest said, a year later, Hamas still is there. Hezbollah is still there. We're still in a deep conflict. The hostages have not all been released. Many of them have died. Everyone's, as again the guest just before me said, everyone has lost from all of this. So for Netanyahu to just kind of keep this conflict going, I think, it's a nice rhetorical talking point, but it's not exactly convincing.
Yes, John, he also said that, Israel is changing the security reality in the region. Yes, Hamas, Hezbollah remain there, but they are weakened, right? Paralyzed. And also Iran is being weakened in a sense. Is that right?
There's no question. No, he's correct about that. I mean, of course, Iran has been weakened. Of course, the axis of resistance has been shown to be not as menacing or as powerful as its own rhetoric has claimed. And of course, Hezbollah has been weakened, and of course, Hamas has been weakened. But weakened is not the same thing as destroyed. If Israel's ultimate aim is to completely destroy and uproot its enemies in the region, it's going to have to come to some sort of peace table as well, which Netanyahu has not proved himself terribly interested in throughout most of his political career.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sara, what's the end game of Mr. Netanyahu? It seems like Israelis, the military is shifting its strategy from, say, destroying Hamas to one of, targeting the so-called axis of resistance, Hezbollah in Lebanon and Iran itself. So is there a clear strategy? Does the strategy enjoy the national support?
Well, I think there are two separate endgames. One is the endgame for the nation, and the other is the endgame for Benjamin Netanyahu's own political future. The endgame, I think, for the state of Israel is that it currently has 120,000 internally displaced refugees from the south and the north of Israel, and they need to be able to return to their homes, or at least return to something that may remain in these parts of the country without ceding, large swaths of territory, essentially to the vulnerability of Hamas in the south and Hezbollah in the north. So Israel has obviously not going to meet its aspiration to root out Hamas and even Hezbollah in its entirety, but I think it wants to delay further incursions for at least several years, and to disarm Hamas militarily, particularly with its capacity and Hezbollah and their capacity to send rockets into Israel, and decapitate as much of the political leadership as possible, at least for the next several years, because Israelis need to return to their homes. Also to liberate the hostages, though that remains a much thornier issue. At this point, we don't know how many are alive, whether it's going to be possible to return them to their homes, and in what condition. It's a really tragic and unbearable aspect of this ongoing conflict. The separate issue is Benjamin Netanyahu's political career. In a functioning state, I think Netanyahu and his colleagues would have resigned on October 8th. Obviously, this has been a profound military and intelligence failure. As one of our previous guests mentioned, the cloak of Israel's invincibility has been shattered, and Netanyahu should be taking the blame. Yet he has managed to steer this conflict over the course of the last year, actually in his political favor. His regime remains intact. In fact, only last week, he gained another ally that has allowed him to have further coalitional stability. And he has managed to stay in power despite not only the events of the past year, but the past several years that have brought him and his government under, increased scrutiny across the West. So there's a necessity for Netanyahu to in many ways keep the war going and remain the commander in chief in order to stabilize his own political future. So, and these are often competing aims: Netanyahu's aspirations for his own political career and what Israel needs to do to survive in a hostile region.
Mm-hmm. Well, now we have Sharmine Narwani, editor-in-chief of the Cradle. Welcome to the show, Sharmine. So now we know that there are still missiles obviously arriving in Israel. At the same time, Israel is preparing to respond to earlier missiles from Iran. People are talking about what kind of targets they are aiming probably. How do you look at the current situation? What's the direction now?
I've only come on to be able to hearing you guys just a minute or two ago, so I'm sorry if I'm going to be repetitive. I think probably I'm a bit more positive than your other guests on the way this war is heading for the axis of resistance. Israel has, since the days of David Ben-Gurion, has had a very clear military strategy of executing.
Seems there's a tech glitch there. And so, Sara, back to you. How do you describe the sentiment inside Israel in terms of retaliating against the Iranian missiles? So obviously people are talking about the different targets, military defense installations, oil industries, or even the leadership in Iran. So what's likely to happen?
Look, I don't know what's likely to happen, but I think sentiment in Israel is that there's been two very, very serious attacks, first in April and then last week, and that Israel needs to restore its national security and its ability to deter Iran. The United States is now imposing some kinds of conditions over the targets that it has allowed Israel to select, or seemingly has offered a kind of quid pro quo of a diplomatic and military armament as cover if Israel will only strike certain targets. It remains to be seen whether the Netanyahu government is going to abide by the demands or the wishes of the Biden administration, or whether Israel feels that its own national security is so at risk that it will go it alone. Now, of course, if it goes it alone, it means that Israel does not necessarily have the capacity to hit Iran's nuclear sites. That would probably require technology and armament from the United States in order to do so. But there is a high possibility that Israel could hit oil refineries, would target military and defense establishment, institutions across Iran. And I think there's very strong approval for that within Israel. There's at this point, nothing seems to prevent a third ballistic missile strike where there could be a mass casualty event in Israel. So I think that Israelis feel that their own lives are at stake here, and a very strong signal needs to be sent to Iran to prevent a third strike, and frankly, another October 7th, which in the next time could be nuclearized. So Israeli sentiment is very strongly in favor of tough measures.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ghanbar, you seem at the same time we do see that with this the recent missile launch against Israelis, the Iranian side seems to have changed their, let's say, strategy of patience. Previously, because there's a reluctance, to attack Israelis or say the civilian area, for example. Do you see a change of policy? I mean, the worst scenario, for example, nuclear facilities were attacked. What will happen?
Well, it was a face-saving gesture on the part of Iranian politicians. But make no mistakes, they will not try to cross the red line in order to wage an all-out war against Israel, because it will attract America and other allies in Europe, and it will be a serious disaster for the global economy. So Iran is calculating its move. Iran is not going to disturb the waters in order to pave the way for a regional war with Israel and its allies. But at the same time, if things get out of control and there is some miscalculation on the part of Iran or Israel, if they somehow decide to destroy or attack or target military installation, atomic installations in Iran or Israel, I'm afraid things will get out of control and we will be heading towards a regional war. So far, it hasn't happened, but mistakes take place, just as the way Israel made a mistake, huge mistake, and demolished an Iranian diplomatic building in Syria, which forced Iran to react. Again, Iran had to react because of the murder of its commanders in Hezbollah and, of course, in Syria. And this was the second time, unprecedented in human history. But now we are waiting. We are still waiting. This is a waiting game. Why it is not happening? Why Israel is not attacking Iran? It's so simple to calculate that. America doesn't allow that to happen. Why? Because America is not ready. If there is a regional war, if things get out of hand, then attention will be taken away from the Ukraine war. America doesn't like that. At the same time, it will fuel further extremism across the region. And of course, it will pulverize, it will devastate the energy sector in the Middle East and of course beyond. For three reasons that I just mentioned, America has stopped the Israeli government from attacking Iran's sensitive nuclear installations and of course oil refineries. But mistakes happen. Israel did that in the past by attacking Iran's consulate in Syria, and it might happen again. Let's cross our fingers that there are still cool heads everywhere, because nobody is ready. I told you, this is a game of losers. Everybody has lost, and these losers are desperate. They want to get some attention. They want to show off. They want to tell the rest of the world that they have won the war, just like the way Netanyahu claims or Iran claims. No, you haven't won the war. Nobody is winning the war. Everybody is losing the war unless you come to your senses and decide to somehow impose some kind of ceasefire in Gaza first.
Well, Sara, so of course, like the U.S. is having an election, about a month from now. Any influence or impact on the Israeli decisions towards Iran?
Look, I don't know that Israel necessarily feels constrained by the upcoming elections, and certainly the Democratic Party and the Biden administration's desire to see Kamala Harris elected. But from the point of view of the United States, the escalation of tensions in the region, the possibility of an outbreak of regional war would certainly be disastrous for the upcoming elections and distract attention from domestic issues and other concerns, and possibly even could tilt favor towards Donald Trump, who seems to have a much more aggressive policy in the region that might appeal to some voters. So they are hoping, and they have been hoping for the past year, really, to calm tensions in the region. But it's not clear that any of the actors involved, not only Israel, but also Iran, which has been, intervening in American elections and even on some of the campus and street protests, is willing to abide by the United States' doctrine to, basically at least delay any major escalation until after November 5th. But we'll see what happens.
Well, John, I want you to weigh in here. The U.S. The U.S. role played, during the past year. On one hand, we do hear that U.S. Let's say diplomats calling for de-escalation, the prevention of a regional war. But at the same time, we do see the continuation of supplying weapons to the Israeli side. So what's the goal? What's the purpose here?
Yeah, it's very difficult for American politicians, even under normal circumstances, outside election cycles, to stand up forcefully to Israel because of America's kind of domestic sort of sensitivities around that issue. But of course, especially 4 weeks away from an election, you're not going to see the Biden administration taking steps that would insert Israel into the dialogue surrounding the election. Having said that, for all the reasons that your previous guest very correctly, I think, cited, it's absolutely not in America's interest for this conflict to escalate. I think one of the absolute worst things that could possibly happen, not just from American perspective, but also from the Israeli perspective, would be an attack on Iran's nuclear sites. I know that's being bandied about. I think that would be one of the most foolish things that the Israelis could possibly do for multiple reasons. For starters, Iran's nuclear facilities are widely dispersed across the country. They're divided sort of laterally as well as horizontally as well as vertically. I mean, you have processing, uranium processing facilities in separate places from, enrichment plants, et cetera, et cetera. There's no way you're going to fundamentally destroy Iran's nuclear industry without the kind of serious military force that really only the United States can offer. And even then, the reality is Iran is already a nuclear capable state for all intents and purposes. It already has all the know-how. All you would be doing is provoking them to actually accelerate their nuclear program. Iran has until now, over decades, not made the decision to actually weaponize, to actually develop a nuclear weapon. But they've made it very clear that an Israeli attack on their nuclear facilities would be that red line. It would change fundamentally their thinking. So Israel would thus be provoking Iran potentially into developing exactly the weapon that it has supposedly been warning against for so many years. It would be such an extraordinarily counterproductive move that it's really hard to imagine. So I think that is neither in the American interest nor in Israeli interest.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sharmine, welcome back. We are seeing at least some people inside Israel are calling for, terming the current situation as an opportunity for Israel to take on the challenges, once and for all, Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. How do you look at that kind of claim or that kind of, push for the government to do so?
That's. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
By the way.
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, that's simply not going to be possible. Since the beginning of the State of Israel and the time of David Ben Gurion, Israel has understood, because of its strategic or lack of strategic depth, its geographical size, its vulnerabilities, that it needs to execute fast, hard wars, which has been the way it's proceeded in almost all its wars. We are now in a protracted war, and you have to look at Israel's goals in these wars, its stated objectives, at least from Gaza, from October 7th onward. The more Israel escalates, the further it leaves its war goals. 1 year on, this is not a short war. This is not a hard war. While Israel has decapitated the senior ranks of Hezbollah right now, you can see that Hezbollah is very active on the front lines. And has not missed a beat. And today, of course, it's attacked Haifa. So the Israelis are now talking about facing war on 7 fronts. So how did they go from October 8th or October 7th, facing one front, now facing 7 fronts in the areas, daily missiles and drones penetrating its air defenses? Have settlers returned to the north and the south? Has Israel achieved even a measure of the security that it had on October 6th? To be honest, there was a poll just this week from the Israeli Broadcasting Authority, which said 61% of Israelis don't feel safe in the country. 86% said they'll never return to the Gaza envelope. 41% say their trust in the army has been damaged. 73% of Israelis believe that Israel's failed against Hamas. I understand that people are writing the obituary of Hezbollah and Hamas, but U.S. think tank studies have shown that 21 out of 24 Hamas battalions are still absolutely active, and the 3 that were put out of service are replenishing themselves. So, now the Iraqi front has risen to defend Lebanon as well. And what we saw was 1 missile from Yemen before, 1 drone from Yemen before, is just going to, has increased in number. And of course, everyone's waiting for the big Israeli reaction on Iran. I don't think it can do very much. I think Israel is very aware of its vulnerabilities. And to understand how vulnerable Israel really is, Iran's 90 times the landmass size of Israel. I mean, Israel has only 6 power plants, 2 oil fields, 2 refineries, 3 gas fields, and half its water is supplied by 5 desalination plants. It has 3 major ports, one that has been taken out of commission by the Yemenis, the Eilat port that went bankrupt. And now Haifa port is being attacked today. So it's Haifa and Ashdod. How is this tiny, tiny state going to survive beating its chest the way it is, going from one front, which the weakest front of all, Hamas, which it could not defeat at all or degrade significantly. Israel's now beating its chest over residential and civilian targets. Anyone can do that kind of damage. But let's not forget, in this 1 year, Israel has gone from being viewed as a state, that is a victim and a democracy to an absolute global pariah with ICJ and ICC court cases standing against it. So I do not see any movement forward being positive for Israel, because now that resistance axis is getting their game together and are at least expressing confidence in being able to degrade Israel further.
Mm-hmm. As Sharmine has said, John, so obviously, I mean, continuous conflicts, against each other is not the way forward, at least not the solution, probably. And then, do you think there is the existence of a peaceful solution? Previously people talk about a 2-state solution. Is that still viable?
I don't think Sarah might have more insight on this than I do, but I don't think that any serious analyst really believes that a 2-state solution is viable or realistic at this point. And yet we're all locked into this kind of fantasy where we have to, these people who are actually in power and officials and so on, are locked into this kind of 2-state industry. Where it's very difficult to kind of acknowledge that solution is not a serious option. At the same time, of course, the 1-state solution is entirely unrealistic for a whole different set of reasons. There is a reality on the ground at this point, which is a 1-state reality, however you want to define it. Israel controls to one degree or another the territories between the river and the sea, and it is ultimately going to be up to Israel to decide how it wants to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Sharmine, what's the solution? I mean, a ceasefire or peace deal? I mean, how far is it?
I think we've moved so far away from a solution and a 2-state solution. Like I was talking about, the movement of Israel to pariah status makes many people around the world, I'm not talking about governments that are allied with Israel, but, the global majority, if you will, understand that you can't really ever make a peace with a militarized state of this kind. And of course, nobody in the West Asian neighborhood can live with a belligerent aggressor state like this. So I think we're moving to a situation in which, people have been talking prior to October 7th about 1 state, about a state that encompasses all Jews and Palestinians, with, 1 man, 1 vote, a democracy for all, everyone living under equality. It is the only solution, to be honest. You're not going to be any further genocidal measures against the Palestinian population will earn Israel even more isolation. So I think, if you can get rid of the extremist government, and this is perhaps something in the U.S.'s hands when it tires of this war game, then maybe we will see some movement towards something unusual that the mainstream is not talking about, which is a 1-state solution.
Well, 1-state solution or 2-state solution, obviously, we have to wait until this wave of conflicts ends itself. With that, we conclude today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.